the news tonight, His Majesty the King and Turkish President Abdullah Gül hold talks in Ankara on bolstering bilateral ties and discuss the joint responsibility of hosting hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says Washington is increasingly confident that weapons being sent to the Syrian opposition are going to moderate forces rather than to extremists. And the six world powers prepare a draft statement at the IAEA headquarters in Vienna, reaffirming their commitment to a diplomatic solution to Iran's nuclear issue. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty the King held talks in Ankara with Turkish President Abdullah Gül on ways to bolster bilateral ties, as well as ongoing developments in the region, namely the situation in Syria and efforts to achieve Palestinian-Israeli peace. The King and Gül held a private meeting attended by Her Majesty Queen Rania and Mrs. Gül, followed by an expanded session of talks in the presence of senior Jordanian and Turkish officials. The two leaders discussed the deteriorating situation in Syria and the effect of the crisis on Jordan as it continues to receive an influx of refugees. They also discussed the urgent need to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict based on a two-state solution. In a joint statement with Gül, His Majesty voiced hope his trip will serve to enhance bilateral relations to help maximize the mutual benefits of free trade agreements signed between Amman and Ankara and to further develop cooperation in trade, ICT, as well as in tourism, manufacturing, energy and water.
On regional issues, we have been watching with deep concern the recent breakout of tensions and violence on the Israeli-Palestinian front. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains the core cause of concern of instability in the region and beyond. The international community must redouble efforts to urgently relaunch negotiations on the basis of the two-state solution, which is the only formula to a just, lasting and comprehensive peace. We are extremely concerned by the threats to Jerusalem and the sanctity of its holy sites, and Jordan will continue its efforts to protect Jerusalem's identity and holy sites, both Muslim and Christian, and Turkey's support for such efforts are vital. I'm here obviously also to discuss the Syrian crisis. There is an urgent need for a political transition that puts an immediate end to the bloodshed, restore security and preserve the territorial integrity and unity of the Syrian people. And only an inclusive transition will stop sectarian conflict and avoid fragmentation of Syria.
On the issue of refugees, His Majesty said both Jordan and Turkey share a responsibility as both countries are hosting hundreds of thousands of refugees.
Turkey and Jordan have received large numbers of refugees. This is a responsibility to both our countries to look after our Syrian brethren. We hope that we will find an end to the conflict as quickly as possible. This is a responsibility that both our countries take seriously, but also it is a tremendous burden to both our nations, one that we will continue to shoulder, and we will continue to give the Syrian people in both our countries all the support that we can, but we also ask the international community to assist Jordan, Turkey and Lebanon in this tremendous crisis and hope that we can alleviate the suffering of Syrian refugees in the three countries just mentioned.
Also in Ankara, His Majesty paid a visit to the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, where he met with its President Cemil Çiçek and Assembly members to discuss common regional issues as well as means of furthering parliamentary cooperation between the two countries. During the meeting, attended by Jordan's lower house Speaker Saad Hail Srour, His Majesty briefed the Assembly on the kingdom's reform process. He highlighted the January parliamentary election as landmark in Jordan's political reforms, which he said aims to enhance public participation in decision-making and bring about a better future to all Jordanians. During a luncheon hosted by Çiçek in honor of His Majesty and his accompanying delegation, King Abdullah listened to a briefing on the parliamentary and legislative process in Turkey. Later in the day, Their Majesties the King and Queen and the accompanying delegation were hosted at a dinner banquet by the Turkish President and Mrs. Gül. Jordan has condemned attempts by Jewish settlers to storm Al-Aqsa Mosque and violate its sanctity. State Minister for Media Affairs Government spokesman Samih Al-Ma'aita said such acts violate international laws and charters and tarnish heavenly religions. These Israeli practices, he added, reflect increased extremism and terrorism by Israeli groups that attempt to violate Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem. He said Jordan is doing its utmost to defend the holy sites in Jerusalem and highlighted His Majesty the King's continued support of Palestinians in their efforts to establish an independent Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. The Parliament's Palestine Committee also condemned the Israeli act. In a statement, the committee said it's a crime in line with Israeli policies to Judaize the holy city of Jerusalem through the confiscation of Palestinian land, constructing settlements, and evicting Palestinians from their homes in occupied Jerusalem. And in the West Bank, dozens of Palestinian students at Bir Zayt University heckled a British diplomat and attacked his car, preventing him from speaking on campus. The students chanted and held banners protesting what they said was Britain's support for the establishment of Israel and its policies. Campus security guards shielded the British Consul General from the protesters as he made his way to his car before being driven off unharmed. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said outside assistance given to the Syrian opposition should strengthen moderate forces within the country. Speaking at a news conference in Doha, Kerry said Washington is increasingly confident that weapons being sent to the Syrian opposition are going to moderate forces rather than to extremists. Kerry arrived in Qatar, the last leg of his European and Gulf tour, after stops in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. He said his talks in both Arab states touched on the situation in Syria and what kind of weapons are being transferred. And earlier, and during a stop in Abu Dhabi, and speaking of the region's need for development, economic diversification and job creation, Kerry praised the UAE's efforts at moving away from an exclusively oil-based economy to a more diversified one.
Throughout this region, in that some governments have not figured out how to provide that kind of alternative. Some don't quite yet know as effectively how to work to create diversity in the marketplace and to create jobs. But here, you all have the blessing of representing a remarkable place in transition.
Kerry's trip as the new U.S. Secretary of State has already seen him visit European states as well as Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Qatar. Syrian authorities have released a German journalist after being arrested for 2.5 months for entering the country through opposition-held territory. Syria's deputy foreign minister told a news conference he was handing the German to the Russian ambassador to Syria, as Germany's embassy in Syria has been closed since last year. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 28 journalists were killed in Syria last year and 21 abducted, while several remain missing.
I wish that he will act like all journalists, whether they are German or others, in covering events objectively and will respect the law and sovereignty of countries and don't interfere in their internal affairs.
What happened ensures the necessity of respecting Syria's sovereignty and the entrance of foreigners to Syrian territory in order to avoid what happened or what may happen.
On the ground, meanwhile, Syrian warplanes bombarded the city of Raqqa one day after it was captured by rebel fighters. Opposition sources and residents said some 60 rockets fell on the city. Yesterday, rebel fighters captured the northeastern city and toppled the statue of President Bashar al-Assad in what would be the first major city to be captured since the revolt erupted. According to reports, the rebels also arrested the governor and Ba'ath Party head, at least one intelligence chief, and the provincial police commander. And over to Iran's nuclear issue, and the UN nuclear watchdog continued its governing board meeting in Vienna, raising further pressure on Iran to address suspicions that it is seeking to design an atomic bomb. According to a draft statement to be delivered at the board meeting tomorrow, the 6 world powers will call for quick and concrete results in nuclear negotiations with Iran. The draft described last week's talks with Iran in Kazakhstan as useful and said diplomacy would be pursued in the coming months. The statement said the 6 powers seek tangible results and at an early stage in the diplomatic process, and reaffirmed their continuing support for a diplomatic solution to Iran's nuclear issue. Tunisia's ruling Islamist party Nahda and its allies agreed to name diplomat Othman Jarendi as foreign minister in the new governing coalition. The appointment came after President Monsef Marzouki asked Interior Minister Ali Arid last month to form a government within 15 days after Prime Minister Hamadi Jebali quit. The new government is being formed amid a forecast budget deficit of 6% of GDP, forcing officials to raise petrol prices 6.8% after a cut in fuel subsidies. The Tunisian finance minister said the price rise would reduce the cost of subsidies in this year's budget. The United States and China have agreed on a draft UN Security Council sanctions resolution that targets illicit activities by North Korean diplomats and Pyongyang's banking relationships. U.S. envoy to the United Nations Susan Rice told reporters after a closed-door meeting of the 15-nation council that North Korea will be subject to some of the toughest sanctions imposed by the United Nations. Chinese Ambassador Li Baodong said the council was aiming to vote on the resolution on Thursday. The draft sanctions resolution is a response to North Korea's third nuclear test last month. North Korea today threatened to scrap an armistice that ended the civil war 60 years ago and sever a military hotline with the United States if South Korea and Washington pressed on with 2-month-long war games. The two Koreas remain technically at war since the conflict ended in a truce rather than a peace treaty 60 years ago. 115 cardinal electors began meeting at the Vatican for a second day of another round of talks to find a new pope. The Vatican aims to have a new pope elected next week and officially installed several days later, so he can preside over the Holy Week ceremony starting with Palm Sunday on the 24th and culminating in Easter the following Sunday. American church historian Father Thomas Rees says the cardinals have the most difficult decision of their lives on their hands and should not be rushed into choosing the next pope.
I think the thing that we really need is somebody who can communicate the gospel in a way that's understandable and attractive to people in the 21st century. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be about, you know, the message of Jesus. And that's an attractive message, but it can get all buried in our churchiness. And so I think we need to get that message out to people. The other thing that I think the cardinals are looking for is someone who can reform or reorganize the Vatican Curia. I mean, what they're looking for is Jesus Christ with an MBA.
The world's largest high-tech fair, CeBIT, opened in the northern German city of Hanover this year under the theme Share Economy. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk together opened the fair, which continues for 5 days. More than 4,000 exhibitors from over 110 countries are taking part, while over 150 companies from Poland, the official partner country, are expected to make the journey across the border. During her tour of the exhibition, Merkel emphasized the importance of strengthening the IT sector in Europe to promote growth and help Europe overcome its economic crisis. She encouraged information technology startups and warned that the European IT sector could fall behind globally if a boom in new startups does not occur.
Wie bist du dazu gekommen, dass du sowas jetzt schon machst?
Ja, mein Vater ist auch aus.
Queensland, Australia, known for advertising the best job in the world, this year is offering one of 6 dream jobs to the youth of the world. Candidates from around the world are given the opportunity of a lifetime, the job of a park ranger, and $100,000 Australian salary and benefits package over 6 months. The successful applicant will experience life as a park ranger, explore the state's natural attractions, discover Queensland's natural paradise, and report back to a global audience. Queensland has always been a popular destination for international youth and is an ideal place to take a gap year and experience Queensland's vast natural wonderland. Winner of Queensland's Best Job of the World for 2009 describes the job as a life-changing opportunity.
Lucky enough to have 5 World Heritage Sites. They all need looking after, they all need preserving, because we've got to be looking after them for the next generation of people. And you'll get the chance to explore them on the ocean, up in the air, or on the land. And you're going to have a whole load of fun doing it too.
And to the world of style on the Paris Fashion Week. Fashion house Chanel unveiled its ready-to-wear collection with models taking a turn around the world, wearing grey and navy plaid coats with dramatic upturned collars or military-styled coats. The autumn-winter collection was heavy on black, as is typical for Chanel, with designer Karl Lagerfeld adding flickering bits of metallic weave into nubby fabrics for suits to add sheen and brighten the looks. Hues of rose and navy wore their way through the collection, as did thigh-high boots molded to the leg and fuzzy cloche caps in electric turquoise. Edi Slimane put on yet another fascinating show as he revealed his second collection for the iconic French label Yves Saint Laurent. Complete with hipster rock and roll music and dramatic lighting, his autumn-winter collection was an ode to grunge. Models wore plaid shirts, rock-chic black leather dresses, sparkly tights, and studded motorcycle boots. The late Yves Saint Laurent is credited for inventing streetwear and democratizing fashion, and this latest collection paid tribute to this aspect by showing looks on catwalk that could easily be found on the streets. In less than half an hour, Manchester United and Real Madrid meet in a Champions League clash in what Real coach Jose Mourinho said is a game the world will stop to watch. Fans of both teams filled the streets of Manchester in the build-up to the game, which will see the return of Cristiano Ronaldo to United for the first time since his move to Spain. The last 16 tie between the European giants is balanced on a knife edge after last month's 1-1 draw in the first leg in Madrid. And while United are top of the Premier League, the trouble for them is that Real come to Old Trafford with confidence after 2 morale-boosting wins against Barcelona. Although it was just another high school basketball game, this one had an improbable ending. With just seconds left on the clock and New Rochelle down by 2 points against New York State High School, Khalil Adni threw the ball 3/4 of the court into the net as the buzzer sounded, giving New Rochelle the 61-60 victory. At first, the referees did not count the basket, but after looking at a video replay, they reversed their decision and New Rochelle were declared champions. In less than 1 day, this video of the shot surpassed 1 million views on YouTube. And finally, for a quick look at the weather, it continues to be chilly and partly cloudy tonight with northwesterly moderate winds. Similar weather conditions prevail in hilly areas tomorrow, but it'll be relatively cold in other regions with northwesterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect fair conditions tomorrow with northerly moderate to fresh winds and slightly choppy seas. The weatherman warns of poor visibility in hilly areas in the early morning hours tomorrow due to fog. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, his reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King and Turkish President Abdullah Gül hold talks in Ankara on bolstering bilateral ties and discuss the joint responsibility of hosting hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says Washington is increasingly confident that weapons being sent to the Syrian opposition are going to moderate forces rather than to extremists. And the six world powers prepare a draft statement at the IAEA headquarters in Vienna, reaffirming their commitment to a diplomatic solution to Iran's nuclear issue. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Ali Tuqan. Thank you for joining us. Good night.